Peering behind the glass and crossing into uncharted territory, we aim to bring you closer to the absolute truth. Step into the past to witness the exact moments that shattered expectations.
We got a report of suspicious activity here. I need to come inside.
What kind of activity?
Anonymous tip. That's all you need to know.
We're having dinner. You got the wrong house.
If there's nothing going on, you shouldn't have a problem letting me in.
You don't have a warrant. You're not coming in.
You're making this difficult for yourself. Step aside and let me do my job!
Officer Mason Rourke, a badge-carrying enforcer with multiple prior complaints buried in department records, knocked hard on a door along Maplewood Avenue, Columbus, Ohio, claiming there was active criminal behavior inside and demanding access. He insisted the report came from a credible anonymous source and made it clear he already believed a crime was in progress. When the homeowner calmly refused entry without proper cause, the officer's demeanor shifted from official to openly aggressive, threatening to handle it his way. What he didn't know, the man he was confronting had the knowledge and the connections to turn a single mistake into a career-ending case. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We like seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe no one should be disturbed in their own home without real cause, hit the like and subscribe button and join the community at JPTV. At exactly 7:42 p.m., inside a two-story brick home at 2147 Maplewood Avenue, the Rhodes family was halfway through dinner, the smell of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables filling the dining room as plates sat half-cleared, and conversation moved easily between work, school, and weekend plans. With Malachi Rhodes, 42, seated at the head of the table in a navy button-down and slacks, his phone resting face down beside his plate as he listened to his daughter, Sania, 14, talk about a presentation she had just given at school, while Althea Rhodes leaned in slightly, smiling and engaged. The kind of quiet, structured evening that didn't leave room for disruption until the knock came. Sharp, controlled, and deliberate. Not casual, not uncertain, but authoritative enough to cut through conversation instantly, forcing silence across the table as Malachi's eyes lifted toward the door. Not panicked, but alert, trained by years of experience to recognize when something about a situation didn't feel right even before a single word was exchanged. The knock coming again, louder this time, 3 firm hits that carried intent, making Althea pause mid-sentence, and Sania sit back quietly as Malachi rose without rushing, wiping his hands with a napkin and placing it neatly beside his plate, before walking toward the front door with measured steps, his posture calm but controlled, the porch light already triggered and casting a silhouette through the frosted glass. Uniform, still, waiting, as he opened the door halfway to reveal Officer Mason Rourke standing square on the porch with his patrol car angled along the curb, headlights still on and bleeding light across the quiet street, his hand resting near his belt as his eyes moved quickly, assessing, judging, deciding before even speaking. "Evening," Malachi said, voice neutral. But Rourke didn't match it, instead delivering his words flat and direct. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this address. I need to come in and take a look." No greeting, no clarification, just an assertion that immediately shifted the tone from conversation to confrontation as Malachi's posture adjusted slightly. Subtle but intentional, his mind already processing the lack of detail, the absence of procedure, the assumption of guilt embedded in the officer's tone. "What kind of activity?" he asked calmly, but Rourke's jaw tightened, irritation surfacing just beneath the surface as he replied, "Anonymous tip. That's all you need to know." While behind Malachi, Althea had moved closer into view, her presence quiet but watchful, and Sania remained by the table, her attention fixed on the doorway. Sensing tension without needing it, explained, "You got the wrong house. We're having dinner," Malachi said, steady and clear. But Rourke leaned slightly to the side, trying to look past him into the home as if expecting to catch something hidden in plain sight. "That's not what I was told. Step aside," he said, not asking but directing, and Malachi didn't move, not an inch. "I'm not stepping aside. You don't have a warrant," he replied, calm but firm, and in that moment the air shifted. The interaction no longer procedural but personal, as Rourke's expression hardened, his stance adjusting as authority turned into pressure. "So you're refusing to cooperate?" he asked, his tone carrying implication more than inquiry, and Malachi met it without escalation. "I'm asking you to follow the law," a sentence that landed heavier than anything said before, triggering a visible change in Rourke as he exhaled sharply and stepped back just enough to reposition himself, his hand moving to his radio. Not yet pressing it, but resting there like a decision waiting to be made. "People who have nothing to hide don't make things difficult," he said, voice lower now, edged with irritation, while inside Althea's arms folded instinctively and Sania's gaze shifted between her parents and the officer, the tension now undeniable. But Malachi remained steady, unaffected by the attempt to provoke or pressure. "And people who follow the law don't enter homes without cause," he replied, leaving no room for misinterpretation as silence stretched between them. Heavier now, filled with challenge rather than uncertainty, Rourke's eyes scanning past him again, searching the interior for something, anything, that would justify what he had already decided. But finding nothing, and instead of stepping back, instead of reassessing, his posture became more rigid, more convinced, as if the absence of evidence itself confirmed suspicion. "I'm going to need you to step aside, or I'll have to escalate this," he said slowly, the threat now clear and unfiltered. And Malachi didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward, didn't retreat. He simply held his ground. "You can do whatever you believe is necessary, but you're not coming into this house without legal grounds." And for a moment, Rourke just stared at him, measuring, weighing, deciding before his thumb pressed down on the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 417, possible active situation. I may need backup." And just like that, inside the Rhodes home, the atmosphere shifted completely. Not louder, not chaotic, but heavier, tighter. The kind of silence that signals something irreversible has just been set in motion as a routine knock on a quiet street turned into the beginning of something far more serious. The kind of moment that doesn't just pass but lingers, stretching seconds into something longer, something charged, as Malachi slowly closed the door just enough to keep it between himself and the officer while still maintaining visibility, his hand resting lightly against the wood as if measuring the boundary, not just physically but legally. His mind already cataloging every word that had been said, every tone shift, every procedural misstep. Because this wasn't unfamiliar territory to him. This was exactly the kind of situation he had studied, analyzed, and testified about. Except this time it was happening in his own home, under his own roof, with his own family just feet away. And behind him, Althea stepped closer, her voice low but controlled as she asked, "What's going on?" Not out of panic, but out of awareness. And Malachi didn't turn fully toward her, keeping his eyes partially on the officer through the narrow opening, as he responded quietly, "He says there's a report, but he won't say what, and he doesn't have a warrant." And that was enough for her to understand the weight of the situation immediately. Her expression tightening not in fear, but in recognition of what this could become. While Sania stood a little straighter near the table, no longer speaking, no longer moving, just watching, absorbing, the normal rhythm of the evening completely replaced by something tense and uncertain. And outside, Rourke shifted his stance again, pacing half a step before stopping, his eyes scanning the windows, the driveway, the neighboring houses as if building a narrative in his head that matched the one he had already committed to, his radio crackling faintly with dispatch, acknowledging his call. The word backup hanging in the air like a trigger that had already been pulled. And inside, Malachi exhaled slowly, not out of fear, but out of control, grounding himself in the moment as he stepped slightly to the side, giving himself a clearer angle of the porch while still blocking entry, his voice calm but deliberate as he spoke again, projecting just enough for the officer to hear clearly. "You need to correct whatever information you were given because you're at the wrong address." And for a brief second, there was an opportunity, a narrow window where the situation could have de-escalated, where Rourke could have reconsidered, could have stepped back, could have verified, but instead his expression hardened further, his posture locking in as if retreat was no longer an option he was willing to take. "We'll determine that," he replied, his tone carrying a finality that made it clear he wasn't questioning his own judgment. He was reinforcing it, and that was the moment the imbalance became undeniable. Not just a misunderstanding, but a refusal to correct one. And inside the house, the weight of that realization settled over the room. Althea placing a steadying hand on the back of a chair, Sania's eyes fixed on her father, and Malachi standing at the threshold between his home and the outside world, fully aware now that this wasn't going to end with a simple apology or a quiet departure, that whatever happened next was going to escalate, and that every second from this point forward mattered. The moment Officer Mason Rourke pushed his way into the Rhodes home, the situation crossed a line that could not be undone. What started at the door as a tense disagreement had now become a clear violation, and the shift was felt instantly by everyone inside. The calm rhythm of a family evening was gone, replaced by a tight, controlled silence that carried tension in every corner of the room. Malachi stepped in behind him, not rushing, not reacting emotionally, but staying close enough to keep control of the situation. His voice was steady when he spoke. "You just entered my home without permission," he said. "You need to step back outside." Rourke ignored him completely. He moved further into the living space, scanning the room again, but this time slower, more deliberate. His eyes moved across the dining table, the plates, the food, the chairs, everything that clearly showed a normal family setting. There was nothing hidden, nothing out of place, no signs of any illegal activity. The truth was right in front of him. But instead of acknowledging it, he adjusted his stance like he had already decided what the situation was. Althea stepped forward slightly, keeping herself between him and Sania. Her voice was calm, but there was strength in it. "You need to leave," she said. "You don't have any reason to be in here." Rourke glanced at her briefly, but there was no real engagement. He looked past her, dismissing her presence as if she was not part of the situation. That reaction alone said enough. Into his radio, he spoke again. "Dispatch, confirming entry. Possible concealment. Continue units." The words did not match what he was seeing, but he said them anyway, building a version of events that would support his actions. Malachi watched him closely. Every movement, every word, every choice was being noted. "You've already seen there's nothing here," he said. "You need to stop and leave." Rourke turned sharply toward him. "I'll decide what I need to do," he replied. His tone was no longer controlled. It carried frustration, but also something deeper, an unwillingness to be challenged. He took a few steps toward the hallway, glancing at the closed doors as if preparing to go further. That movement made Althea react immediately. "No," she said, stepping forward just enough to block his path without touching him. "You're not going any further." For a brief moment, the room held still. Rourke looked at her, then at Malachi, then back toward the hallway. He seemed to be weighing his next move, not based on law, but on control. "You're interfering with an investigation," he said. "There is no investigation," Malachi replied. "You walked into the wrong house." That statement hit harder than anything else. It forced the reality of the situation into the open. But Rourke did not accept it. Instead, he stepped back slightly and shook his head, like he was rejecting what was right in front of him. "People say that all the time," he muttered. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder. The flashing lights reflected across the walls inside the house, breaking through the warm lighting with sharp red and blue streaks. The backup units had arrived. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles and moved quickly toward the house. The front door was still open, and from the outside they could already see enough to understand that something was off. A quiet home, a family standing together, and 1 officer already inside. Officer Elias Monroe entered first, his movement controlled and observant. He did not rush to speak. His eyes moved across the room, taking in details. The table, the food, the people, the lack of urgency. "What's going on?" Monroe asked. Rourke responded immediately, his voice quick, almost defensive. "Anonymous tip. Possible drug activity. They refused entry, so I proceeded." Monroe did not react right away. He kept looking around, processing what he was seeing. Malachi spoke calmly. "We told him he had the wrong address. He forced his way in." There was a pause. Monroe turned his head toward Rourke. "Do you have probable cause?" he asked. Rourke answered, but there was a slight delay. "We had a tip." "That's not what I asked," Monroe replied. The difference between the two men was clear now. One was trying to justify, the other was trying to understand. Rourke shifted his stance, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "I made a judgment call," he said. Monroe looked around the room again, slower this time. Every detail confirmed the same thing. There was no threat, no urgency, no reason for what had happened. Meanwhile, the second officer stood near the door, watching both sides, his attention moving between Rourke and the family. He had not spoken yet, but his posture showed that he was already questioning the situation. Inside the house, Sania remained still, her eyes fixed on the officers. She had not said a word since the door was forced open. Her silence added weight to the moment. Althea stood beside her now, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, steady and protective. Malachi remained composed, but his focus had sharpened. This was no longer just about the officer. It was about what came next. Rourke, however, had not stepped back. Instead, he took a step toward Malachi again. "You think you know the law?" he said, his voice edged with irritation. "I do," Malachi replied. That answer landed without emotion, but it carried weight. It was not a challenge. It was a fact. Rourke's expression tightened. The control he had tried to maintain was slipping. He was no longer leading the situation. He was reacting to it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Malachi did not respond immediately. He held eye contact, steady and unshaken. "No," he said finally, "you already did that." The room went quiet again. Outside, more movement could be heard. The presence of multiple officers now surrounded the house, but inside, the focus had narrowed. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about decisions. And one of those decisions had already been made the moment Rourke stepped through that door. Now everything that followed would be measured against it. The room fell into a heavy silence the moment Officer Elias Monroe stepped between Mason Rourke and Malachi Rhodes. It was no longer the kind of tension that came from uncertainty. This was the kind that came after a line had already been crossed, when everyone present understood that what had just happened could not be undone. Rourke's grip had already left Malachi's shirt, but the impact of the shove still hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. "Step back," Monroe said, his voice calm but firm, directed straight at Rourke. Rourke did not respond immediately. He stood there for a moment, his chest rising slightly with controlled breathing. His jaw tight, his eyes still fixed on Malachi, like he had not fully accepted the shift that had just taken place. Then, slowly, he took a step back, but the tension in his posture did not fade. Malachi adjusted his shirt and straightened his stance. He did not rush. He did not react emotionally. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "He forced his way into this house," he said, looking directly at Monroe. Monroe nodded once, acknowledging the statement without interrupting. Then he turned back to Rourke. "Walk me through exactly what happened," Monroe said. Rourke answered quickly, almost too quickly. "Anonymous tip came in, possible drug activity. They refused to cooperate, and I had reason to believe evidence could be concealed." His explanation was structured, but it lacked weight. It sounded rehearsed, not grounded. Monroe did not respond right away. Instead, he scanned the room again. The dining table was still set, plates half full, glasses untouched, the kind of details that told a clear story without needing words. "Dispatch," Monroe said into his radio. "Confirm the details on the call tied to this address." There was a brief pause before the response came through. "Unit on scene, the call was logged as an anonymous report. No specific details provided. No prior incidents associated with the address." Monroe lowered the radio slowly. "No prior incidents," he repeated. Not as a question, but as a confirmation. Rourke shifted slightly. "That doesn't mean nothing's happening," he said, but the confidence in his voice had dropped. Monroe did not engage with that statement. Instead, he looked toward Malachi again. "Sir, do you have identification?" he asked. Malachi nodded and walked calmly toward a small table near the hallway. His movements were controlled, deliberate. He picked up his wallet, removed his ID, and handed it over without hesitation. Monroe looked at it. Then he paused. It was not a long pause, but it was noticeable. His eyes moved from the ID back to Malachi, then back to the ID again. "What do you do, Mr. Rhodes?" Monroe asked. "I work in civil litigation," Malachi replied. "I consult on cases involving unlawful entry, excessive force, and violations of procedure." The words settled into the room with weight. Rourke's posture shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show that he understood what that meant. Monroe handed the ID back slowly. "Have you been involved in cases like this before?" he asked. "Yes," Malachi said, "more than once." There was no emotion in his tone, just clarity. Monroe turned back toward Rourke. "Do you have a warrant?" he asked. Rourke did not answer. "Do you have probable cause?" Monroe asked again, more direct. Rourke's jaw tightened. "I made a judgment call." "That's not what I asked," Monroe said. Silence followed. The second officer, who had been standing near the doorway, stepped forward slightly. "I checked with dispatch again," he said. "The caller didn't give a name, didn't give details, didn't describe anything specific, just said suspicious activity. That's it." That detail stripped everything down. There was no strong report, no verified claim, no urgency, just a vague statement, followed by action. Monroe turned fully toward Rourke now. "You forced entry into a private residence without a warrant," he said, "based on an anonymous call with no supporting information." Rourke opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. For the first time since arriving at the house, he looked like he did not have control over the situation. Malachi spoke again, calm and measured. "You also escalated after confirming there was no threat," he said, "and you used physical force inside my home." There was no anger in his voice. That made it more effective, because it did not sound like a reaction. It sounded like a record. Rourke looked at him. For a brief moment, there was something different in his expression. Not aggression, not authority. Uncertainty. "You don't know what you're talking about," Rourke said, but the statement lacked strength. Malachi held his gaze. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," he replied. Then he reached into his pocket slowly. The movement was calm, controlled, and deliberate. He pulled out his phone. "I recorded everything," he said. That sentence changed the atmosphere completely. Monroe's eyes shifted to the device. The second officer looked at Rourke, and Rourke did not speak, because now the situation had moved beyond explanation. It had moved into evidence. Malachi tapped the screen once, bringing up the recording interface. The faint reflection of the room could be seen on the screen. Rourke at the doorway, his voice captured, his words preserved. "I started recording the moment you knocked," Malachi said. "Everything from the first statement to when you came inside." Monroe took a small step closer, not to take the phone, but to acknowledge what it represented. "Understood," he said. Rourke looked at the phone, then back at Malachi, then at Monroe. His breathing had changed, slower now but heavier. The reality of the situation was settling in. There was no longer any room to adjust the narrative, no space to reframe what had happened. The sequence of events was fixed. Outside, the flashing lights continued to reflect through the windows, but inside the house, everything had narrowed down to a single point. What happened? And what could be proven? Monroe straightened his posture slightly and turned his full attention back to Rourke. "Right now," he said, "this is no longer about a call." He paused briefly. "This is about your actions." Rourke said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been done. The second officer shifted his stance near the doorway, now clearly positioned in a way that was no longer supportive of Rourke, but observant of him. That shift mattered, because it showed that the situation had turned. Malachi lowered his phone slightly but did not put it away. "I will be filing a report," he said. And I will be providing this recording? Again, no emotion, just intent. Monroe nodded once. That's your right, he said. Rourke looked toward the door briefly, then back into the room. The space that he had entered with authority now felt different, smaller, controlled. Not by him, by the facts, and by the people who had just witnessed everything unfold. Malachi took a slow breath, steady and composed. This didn't have to happen, he said. No one disagreed, because everyone in the room knew it was true. One decision at the door could have ended it, but instead that decision had been ignored. And now, standing inside a home he had no right to enter, facing a situation he could no longer control, with evidence already in someone else's hands. Officer Mason Rourke was no longer the one asking questions. He was the one being measured. And this time, every detail mattered. The shift was complete the moment the words settled in the air. This was no longer a tense situation that could be talked down or explained away. It had become something official, something that would be written, reviewed, and judged. Officer Mason Rourke was no longer in control of the scene. He was part of it. Officer Elias Monroe looked at him for a brief moment, then spoke clearly. Rourke, step outside. There was a pause. Rourke didn't move immediately. His eyes moved from Malachi to the phone in his hand, then toward the doorway, as if he was trying to decide if there was still a way to recover what had already been lost. But there wasn't. Step outside, Monroe repeated. This time, Rourke turned and walked toward the door. His steps were slower now, controlled but uncertain. The same officer who had forced his way into the house minutes earlier was now leaving it without a word. The second officer followed him out, staying close but not speaking. For the first time since everything began, the roads home felt slightly calmer. The tension had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It was no longer pressing in from the outside. It was now focused on what would happen next. Monroe remained inside. He turned toward Malachi and spoke in a measured tone. Sir, are you okay? Malachi nodded. I'm fine, he said, but this should never have happened. Monroe didn't disagree. He couldn't. Althea stepped forward slightly. He came into our home, she said, in front of our daughter. Her voice was steady, but the weight of what she was saying was clear. Monroe acknowledged her with a nod. I understand, he said, and it's going to be addressed. Outside, the atmosphere was different. The flashing lights continued to reflect across the street, but the urgency was gone. Officers stood in place, waiting, watching, aware that the situation had changed direction. Monroe stepped outside and joined them. What's your justification for entry? He asked Rourke directly. Rourke tried to respond. I had reason to believe. No, Monroe interrupted. You had a call. That's not the same thing. Rourke stopped speaking. You didn't confirm the address, Monroe continued. You didn't establish probable cause, and you escalated after it was clear there was no threat. Each sentence was direct. No raised voice, no emotion. Just facts. Rourke looked down briefly, then back up, but he didn't argue. I was doing my job, he said, but the words didn't carry weight anymore. Monroe didn't respond to that. Instead, he reached for his radio. Dispatch, I need a supervisor at this location, he said. That call changed everything again. Inside the house, Malachi stood near the doorway, his phone still in his hand. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't reacting emotionally. He was focused. Althea stood beside him, her presence steady, while Sania remained quiet, watching, trying to process everything that had just happened. Malachi looked down at his phone for a moment, then back toward the open door. This is already documented, he said. Althea looked at him. What happens now? She asked. Malachi took a breath. Now it becomes official, he said. Within minutes, another vehicle pulled up. A supervisor stepped out, his presence immediately shifting the tone outside. He approached Monroe first. What do we have? The supervisor asked. Monroe explained everything clearly. Anonymous call. No details, no history on the address. Forced entry, physical contact. The supervisor listened without interruption. Then he turned to Rourke. "Is that accurate?" he asked. Rourke hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes." That one word carried everything. The supervisor nodded once, then spoke calmly. "Step aside." Rourke did as he was told. The supervisor then approached the doorway, stopping just outside as he addressed Malachi. "Sir, I'll need a statement from you," he said. "You'll have it," Malachi replied, "and the recording." The supervisor paused briefly, then nodded. Understood. There was no resistance now, no attempt to shift the story. The facts were already set. Officers began documenting the scene. Notes were taken, times were recorded, statements were prepared. The situation had moved fully into process. Rourke stood near the patrol car, silent. His earlier aggression was gone. In its place was stillness. The kind that comes when someone realizes that what they did cannot be undone. Inside, the Rhodes family slowly returned to their space. The dinner table was still there, untouched since the moment the knock had come. The evening they had started with was gone, replaced by something they would remember for a long time. Malachi looked around his home, then toward the doorway again. One moment had changed everything. A knock, a decision, and a refusal to step back when it mattered. Now the situation had turned completely. This was no longer about suspicion or control. It was about accountability. And accountability was already in motion. Malachi lowered his phone slightly, but he didn't put it away. Because now it wasn't just a device. It was proof. And that proof had shifted the balance. If you believe no one should have their home violated without cause, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, where the truth comes out no matter what, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay connected with JPTV.
The precise records of our past hold the essential narratives that define our present reality. To deeply understand these narratives is to search for the absolute truth. Thank you for sharing in our steadfast commitment to uncover what truly happened.